All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Round 2 coverage of the NBA playoffs here at Hoops Tonight is brought to you by Chase Freedom Unlimited. How do you cash back? Well, the Philadelphia 76ers go on the road to beat the Boston Celtics resoundingly to take a 3-2 lead. A ton of thoughts I want to get into. We are also live on AMP, so if you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast feeds, don't forget that AMP is the very first place that you guys can get these shows. You guys know the drill. Before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the Volume's YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss any show announcements. And last but not least, for whatever reason you guys miss one of these videos and you can't get back over to YouTube to finish, don't forget you can find them wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight. All right, so if you guys remember, I predicted a big run by the Sixers early in the year as they were getting healthy, as Tyrese Maxey and James Harden were coming back. I liked a lot of things specifically that I was seeing with that roster makeup. And in January, they really started to take off. And then they ran into a bunch of really tough games, as every team does and as stacked the league is, in that February, March, April time of the year. And those of you guys who followed the show at that point, you might remember me frequently talking about how much I appreciated the fight that James Harden and Joel Embiid showed. There was a specific game that they lost, and I think it was at home actually, to Boston, where Jayson Tatum hit that pullback game-winning 3 at the top of the key, where they were up against it late in that game. And rather than letting go of the rope or just saying, hey, it's a regular season, who cares, let's just let it go, both James Harden and Joel Embiid made a bunch of big plays down the stretch of that game, and they actually tied it late, I believe, on a foul post-up Joel Embiid on Jaylen Brown, where he made a couple free throws, and they made it a game. And then Jayson Tatum ended up just winning it at the buzzer. But they had a bunch of other really impressive performances down the stretch of that season. I thought it was a big part of Joel Embiid's MVP case, which was essentially just he won all these big head-to-head matchups. He was a much better defensive player than Nikola Jokic. That was kind of the narrative surrounding Joel Embiid's MVP, right? And I wasn't very optimistic about them in this series, but in my series preview, if you guys remember, I said I would have given the Sixers a very good chance to beat the Celtics if Joel Embiid was healthy. There was just such a big question mark surrounding his knee. And specifically, I talked about his rhythm. And the fact that at the foul line, which has become such an important part of Joel Embiid's success and I shouldn't even say success, but taking that next leap from like guy who's just another one of the stars at the top of the league to a guy who's perennially in the MVP conversation, the guy that can succeed and stay efficient in the NBA playoffs, was that success around the free throw line. But so much of it relies on his jump shooting. And I was worried about his rhythm getting disrupted. Well, I was flat out wrong, because Joel Embiid has been incredible. He completely shook off whatever that little rough stretch was that he had against Al Horford down the stretch of Game 4, and he absolutely torched the Celtics tonight. James Harden, after a couple of rough games in Game 2 and Game 3, I kind of broke down, if you guys remember, the dynamic in James Harden's playoff history of succeeding in Game 1s and then struggling as the series progresses. Well, he's thoroughly shook that off too, as he has been getting stronger and stronger down the stretch of this series. Not as much of a scoring performance in this game tonight, but I thought he absolutely dominated the flow of the game. He was the guy that repeatedly was setting up Joel Embiid with that pocket pass to the high post there right around the elbow where he's so successful. There was an action that Philly could run theoretically every time down the floor. Now, they don't actually do it every time down the floor. It's not how basketball works. But anytime they got into a half-court environment, they were able to run a pick and roll with James Harden and draw Rob Williams or Al Horford or whoever into kind of like a loose drop coverage around the foul line, but extend it out to where James Harden was dribbling. And then he could just throw that pocket pass to Joel Embiid, and Embiid could either make a shot from the foul line, make a kick-out pass to the weak side if he drew a helper, or just rip through to the basket and try to draw a foul. That was their like go-to play. Whereas for Boston, they are yet to really uncover anything in this series that is kind of a dependable, like we can, run this Jayson Tatum post up from the left block and he's just going to score every single time or get a great shot every single time. Or, here's this pick and roll that we run with, Derek White and Al Horford that, or pick and pop that just leads to a wide open three and he can make it every single time. They haven't really established anything. And that specific pick and roll dynamic with James Harden and Joel Embiid, more like a short roll to that foul line, has been the ultimate trump card in this series. And as we've made it to Game 5, as everyone else has kind of settled into the series and all of the Sixers guys are comfortable in their matchups, right? Like PJ Tucker kind of has an idea of how he wants to guard Jaylen Brown, right? Joel Embiid is very much ignoring Al Horford, and Al Horford had a nightmare game trying to shoot the three tonight. But as this series has progressed, James Harden and Joel Embiid have elevated and become the best players in the series. Now, the series is not over. A lot of basketball left. This Boston team has a lot of talent, and I'm sure all you Sixers fans know Game 6 is not going to be easy. But credit to James Harden and Joel Embiid, because as we came into this postseason run, the biggest fear surrounding them was, will they be able to shake off their reputation as being players who crater in efficiency when they get to the postseason? And instead, both of them have gotten stronger and stronger as the series has progressed. So shout out to those two guys. I think it's been such a fascinating season from the standpoint of competitive spirit for those two, because it wasn't pretty last year. The Miami Heat kind of punked you, and you came back stronger. And you've made the improvements in the areas of your game that you needed to, and now you're reaping those benefits here as you're one win away from the Eastern Conference Finals. I also wanted to shout out the defensive effort. If you guys remember in Game 1, the first of two James Harden game winners, there was this focus on Boston's offensive execution. Marcus Smart post up on the final play. What the heck are they doing? Blah, blah, blah. As I went back and watched the film of that game, I thought Boston's offensive process was fine. I mean, for what Boston was doing, Philly was just defending their asses off. They're doing a bunch of really basic, defensive kind of baseline principles that a lot of teams around the league use, especially in the playoffs, and they're just executing really well. So they're defending on the perimeter well. They're sliding their feet, and they're flattening out drives. That's step one. They're digging down into driving lanes, right? So, if a guy is on the left wing and I'm guarding there's a ball handler on the right wing, that dude who's guarding the guy in the left wing is down at the nail, just prepared for that drive to the right. And if they make that pass, it's a hard closeout. And Boston, it's interesting. They have a ton of guys that can shoot and a ton of guys that can pass and a ton of guys that can dribble. But what they don't have are just dead eye, you cannot give this guy any space type of shooters. And so as a result, a good hard closeout goes a long way to turning a deadly shot into a shot that they can live with, right? On the back line, the rotations. If anybody gets beat off the dribble, you're seeing Joel Embiid step in to help, and then the guy guarding the ball handler just sprints out to Al Horford. Or the next guy on the wing will go to Al Horford and he'll sprint to the next guy. The rotations are incredibly sharp, and that's been from Game 1 on in this series. They just needed to get the offensive production to make it work. It's funny, I'm going to butcher this because I can't remember who exactly conceptualized this idea, but there's this 2-1-1 theory in the NBA playoffs. Essentially, you need your best player to win you 2 games. You need your second best player to win you 1 game, and then you need your role players to win you a game. And that's typically not typically, but that's a very common path that you'll see a team win an NBA playoff series with. And James Harden, your second best player, got you 2 games in this series. Game 1 by himself without Joel Embiid, and then in Game 4, as Joel Embiid was struggling with the Al Horford matchup, James Harden carried you home, including hitting yet another game winner. But that you needed to get a game out of Joel Embiid where he dominates, and that's what Joel Embiid did in this particular game. Dominating at the rim defensively, drawing a ton of fouls, torturing them in the short roll at the foul line. But that was the offensive lift they needed to carry them to their 3rd win with a defense that has been mostly phenomenal throughout this entire playoff run. A couple of specific things they're doing. So Horford missing that allowed Joel Embiid to stay at the rim. That's an important part of it. He was blocking and bothering a bunch of shots around the rim. Chasing them off the 3-point line. This is the problem of being a one-dimensional team. If you really look at this Boston Celtics team, Jaylen Brown's the only guy who's really comfortable working out of the mid-range, right? And is kind of more of a a creative shot maker inside the 3-point line, right? And he only took 16 shots in this game, which we'll get to in a minute. So like with that limitation, you've turned your perimeter defenders, you've turned their task into something that's much more achievable. Chase the guy off the 3-point line. If he beats you off the dribble, just try to flatten out his drive as best as you can. If you get beat, just rotate to the next shooter. You've got help behind you. The helper doesn't need to come up to the mid-range. The helper just can meet you at the basket and either take a charge or Embiid, if he's there, is going to be able to deter shots at the rim, and you rotate around. By chasing them off the 3-point line and this team not feeling comfortable doing anything but taking layups and threes has turned the defensive job for Philly into one that's much more achievable, and that preys on Boston's weaknesses. They don't have a guy who can score in the mid-range. Look at the points in the paint in this game. Go to look at the team stats. I checked before. We're going right after the final buzzer, so I missed some of garbage time, but it was literally 34-34 in the late fourth quarter in points in the paint. So, like, Philly's not getting any points in the paint either, but they don't care because they thrive in the mid-range. James Harden has been thriving in the mid-range in this series. Joel Embiid has been thriving in the mid-range in this series. So they can live with that. But on the Boston front, when they're not getting points in the paint, they damn well better be hitting all their threes, and they weren't tonight. And so it's made them a little bit one-dimensional, and it's put them in some problems. So shout out to Philly. I think a lot of their roster constructs that make them a successful playoff team have come to the surface. And big shout out to Joel Embiid and James Harden, who have guys who I personally have been very critical of in their playoff careers, have overcome a lot of that in this playoff run. Really quickly on Boston, I'm really confused by the fact that Joe Mazzulla, and I've been talking about this entire series as we've been talking about James Harden ISOs and pick and roll coverage and things along those lines. He just hasn't done anything gimmicky or tried anything to try to throw them off of rhythm, right? We're covering this Lakers series, and it's like every game there's a monumental chess move. Like, oh, we're going to put Jared Vanderbilt on Draymond Green. Oh, we're going to start JaMychal Green so that we can put Anthony Davis in screen and roll. Oh, we're going to start Gary Payton II. Oh, we're going to put Anthony Davis on Andrew Wiggins now. It's like both coaches are like, as soon as they start getting burned by something, they're always thinking about how they can adjust. Whereas, like, we're in game 4 and I'm watching James Harden work in isolation while PJ Tucker's on the floor. How does that happen? You saw it a little bit at the end of this game, but they started putting Marcus Smart on Joel Embiid and fronting, and then having Al Horford ignore PJ Tucker behind the back. That should have been the entire damn series. That should have been an adjustment they figured out in game 2 and tried to force Philly to do something different. So, like, you cannot be Mr. All we got to do is execute better. Yes, execution matters. But at the end of the day, when you are facing warping offensive personnel like Joel Embiid and James Harden, you have to be willing to try different things. One other thing is there's a clear hierarchy with Philadelphia. It's like James Harden, high pick and roll with Joel Embiid, or post-ups with Joel Embiid, ISOs with James Harden, right? And like every once in a while when those guys are tired, they'll toss the ball to Tyrese Maxey and have him run a pick and roll, or they'll toss the ball down to Tobias Harris in the post. But it's the stars that decide, like, hey, we're taking a break on this possession. There's a very clear hierarchy. With Boston, there's just so many guys that are used to having the ball in their hands. Jaylen Brown used to having the ball in his hands. Marcus Smart, Jayson Tatum, Malcolm Brogdon, Derek White, all of these guys are used to having the ball in their hands and making decisions. And so the hierarchy gets a little tricky. In this game, Jayson Tatum in particular was just full tunnel vision, empty the clip. And I admired it from a competitive standpoint, but like he was just driving into traffic and he was making some shots and getting to the foul line, but like it just ruins the flow of the offense, and everyone else is just kind of standing around, doesn't know what to do. Jaylen Brown only takes 16 shots. The guards are Malcolm Brogdon and Derek White are co-opting possessions. It'd be a lot easier if you had spot-up shooters around them, and it's like Jayson and Jaylen are the only two guys going. It just gets a lot more simple from a rhythm standpoint. We're seeing this in the Denver-Phoenix series. We got Devin Booker and Kevin Durant just deciding every single possession now that Chris Paul's out, and their offense looks better. So, like, sometimes less is more when it comes to primary ball handling. And I understand the predicament. Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum aren't traditional point guards, so you need guys that can ball handle, but this is the catch-22 when your two best players are not great playmakers. You end up in a situation where you have to supply them with playmaking, and now you just have a bunch of guys who know how to dribble, and their offense can get really, really stagnant. Look at Philly. You've got guys that are just role player specialist. PJ Tucker, role player specialist. Daniel House, role player specialist. DeAnthony Melton, role player specialist. Even their other two primary guys like Tobias Harris and Tyrese Maxey, they can go 6 minutes at a time without touching the basketball, and they don't care because there's a clear hierarchy there. And I think that's been an advantage towards Philly. This is not over. Boston, I believe, still has more talent down the roster. They're very capable of going in and beating Philly in Game 6. I mean, they beat them in Game 3, and they were up big late in Game 4, so they certainly are capable, but they're in a tough spot here, and I expect a raucous, desperate Philly environment as they try to end this series. All right, guys, that is all I have for right now. We are going to be back later tonight on YouTube to break down Game 5 of Nuggets Suns.